Robert Wilson, Pittsburgh.
Roger Marshall, Great Bend.
Randy Dahl, Leon.
And I'm Gerald Lauber from Topeka.
Tom Dill, Salina.
Don Budd, Kansas City.
Good evening, Deborah Bolton, Garden City.
Sheila Camus, Commission Secretary.
Robin Jennison, Topeka.
Keith Sexton, Pratt.
Chris Thomason, Legal Counsel.
At this time, we welcome any public comment on non-agenda items. Does anybody have any comment this evening? Hearing and seeing none. Doug, you want to start out with some definitions?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, 115.1-1 is where we have things defined. We're wanting to add a definition of an artificial lure. This is largely in response to a relatively new lure called the Alabama rig. We want to make sure that people understand that it can't be configured with up to 5 different lures on it. So the regulation would just simply define what an artificial lure is. People could still use the Alabama rig, but they'd only be able to put 2 lures on the Alabama rig.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Doug? I think we vote on this, don't we?
Yes.
Could I have a motion for approval of KAR 115-1-1?
I vote to accept, or move to accept.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. Sheila?
Commissioner Bolton,
Yes.
Commissioner Budd,
Yes.
Commissioner Dill,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl,
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall,
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber.
Yes.
Pass 7-0.
Okay, hand fishing?
Okay, 115-18-18. Right now, it requires people to fill out a report at the end of the hand fishing season. It's a mandatory report. We're asking to remove that requirement, and we'll handle it through a voluntary system like we handle for most of our other harvest information. We feel we can get just as good a sample that way as we can by imposing a mandatory reporting requirement. Any questions?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Sheila?
Can I ask who did the second? I missed. Don, did you
Thank
do that?
Don.
Oh, yes,
I'm sorry, I missed that.
I'm just anxious to vote.
Okay. Commissioner Bolton,
Yes.
Commissioner Budd,
Yes.
Commissioner Dill,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl,
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall,
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber.
Yes.
Pass 7-0.
Question on it, Doug. Will people still be required to buy the permit?
Yes. Doesn't do away with the requirement. It just means they don't have to do a mandatory report.
2514?
On 2514, was where we set fishing, creel limit, size limit, possession limit, and open seasons. We have 2 new trout waters that we would like to add. That's Cherryville Lake Tanko and Great Bend Stone Lake. The Veterans Pond in Great Bend's been plagued with blue-green algae problems, and as such, we would like to move that fishery to a different location. So it won't be 2 places in Great Bend. We'll just be moving from one to another. And then, along with this, do we vote on the reference document at the same time, Chris? Then we have the reference document, which is where we have length and creel limits that differ from the statewide regulations. And we've workshopped this several occasions, so I don't know how much detail you want me to go into. Probably the one change in here that's going to be the most controversial would be the reduction in creel of crappie from 50 at Glen Elder to 20 a day. That's the one that's generated the most comments. So most of them have been positive. There have been some negative comments on that.
Most of the comments about Glen Elder have been positive as well.
Most of them have been from the locals anyway. Now, I'm not sure about the Nebraskans that were coming down catching the crappie.
What was the crappie, the guys from out around there, they were at a couple meetings and they had.
The concern is we have a tremendous crappie fishery out there right now, and it's been it's been a situation in the wintertime where they've been able to routinely catch their 50, which isn't common in Kansas reservoirs. We have some people that are lucky enough to be able to catch 50, but 10% of the anglers at Glen Elder in the wintertime were reaching that goal. And the concern was with the fishery that we have out there right now that we could spread the harvest out and prolong the benefits of the big year class that we're living off of right now. We still think we might have had a good year class from last year, but still a little bit too early to know. I haven't had a chance to talk to Scott about what he's done yet this fall, if he's sampled yet or not. But we're hopeful that we have at least another moderate year class coming up behind it. But the idea of the reduction in the creel was one that came from the anglers in the area that came to the commission and to the secretary asking for us to consider a creel reduction at Glen Elder.
Okay, so they actually are the ones who promoted this thing, okay. Thank you.
What's the crappie size there? The size limit?
I don't think it has a size limit. There's no link limit on Glen Elder. It's just a creel limit only. We talked about whether or not it would be more appropriate to try the minimum link limit as opposed to a reduction in the creel. Scott Waters, the biologist out there, felt like the most acceptable to the anglers would be the creel reduction more so than the link limit. And that's the comments we got back from the anglers that attended the commission meeting as well.
Yeah, the emails and phone calls that I've gotten have been supportive of reducing it to the 25. 20. I'm sorry, 20.
Okay, any more discussion on this item? Now, do we vote, does the reference document just automatically go with it?
Yes.
Did we have another comment? Michael?
Question. We've got several lakes like this already in Kansas, Council Grove, Perry, Clinton. Has it been proven that that's improved the fisheries there by having the reduced creel in it?
I think it's been more sociological in most cases than it has been biological. The minimum link limits have had a biological change because the other ones have not had catch rates that were high enough for anglers to routinely exceed or reach that 50-a-day creel that the statewide creel limit has. The 20, even in some of the better years, it's still pretty hard to get 20 on some of those lakes with the creel of 20 a day.
What's the average maximum lifespan of a crappie? I mean, I realize it varies a lot, but if you've got a good year class, say you've got the 2009 year class, if you weren't fishing them, how long might that go before?
Well, you know, we'll pick up some individuals that'll make it to age 7, but most of them don't live past age 4.
So that most of them are dying anyway.
Well, they're being harvested, most of them. Yeah.
Any more discussion? Do we vote on the statute, and then do we also vote on the reference document? All in one. Okay, well then I'd like a motion that we approve 115-25-14.
So move.
Second.
Any more discussion? Sheila?
Commissioner Bolton?
Yes.
Commissioner Budd?
Yes.
Commissioner Dill?
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl?
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber?
Yes.
Pass 7-0.
Okay. Bait fish?
Okay, 115-7-3, the taking of bait fish or minnows. This is sort of a change in direction from what we passed last year to protect from the spread of invasive species. After a lot of input from the public, they were asking for us to lighten up a little bit on the ability to take fish from the wild. And so what we have now is a proposal that would allow the taking and use of live bait fish within the drainage except from a designated aquatic nuisance species water, allow the taking of bluegill and green sunfish to be used as bait fish anywhere in the state except if taken from a designated nuisance, aquatic nuisance species water, and restrict the importation of out-of-state bait fish unless they meet the criteria that we've established for commercially purchased bait fish coming into the state. The purpose of the proposed amendment is to attempt to protect from the spread of invasive species.
What made you change the direction on this? other than the screaming and yelling?
That was, the big issue was the fact that there's quite a tradition for catching bluegill and green sunfish and using them on trot line. It's mostly cat fishermen that are fishing with trot lines that wanted to see some flexibility here. We do give up a little bit of the protection that we had by doing that. But these are two species that are more readily identifiable. We did not include something like gizzard shad, which can be easily confused with Asian carp. So we're trying to still be responsible, and any species that can be look-alike species, we didn't want to include and allow people to move those from one place to another.
But you feel like the two fish that are on there, people will identify them, and
Most people can correctly identify a bluegill and with a sunfish species, bluegill and a green sunfish.
Okay.
They're pretty good at identifying those. And when we get into some of the silvery minnows, the gizzard shad, a lot of confusion there.
but they're not included.
But they're not going to be included here.
Give me an example of how this would occur.
Well, somebody could go to, they could go to a body of water that does not have aquatic nuisance species in it, collect bait from one place, either rod and reel or with a cast net or a seine, and then be able to put them in a bucket and transport them to another water and use them for bait.
But we're still depending on them to know that it's a body of water that is or is not
Right.
deemed.
An aquatic nuisance
Aquatic.
species, and we do post those, and we have the official designated aquatic nuisance species waters that we are adding a new one to that tonight.
Haven't we always had them posted, though, and it still happened? We still have
Right.
the spread of this?
We've always had a habit of, we've always had a policy of posting. Anytime we are aware that there's a nuisance species, we post all the public access areas with signs that inform the public that they're there.
And you're recommending this because these two species are readily identifiable?
Right.
Is that it?
They're less likely to be confused with invasive species.
Isn't this getting away from what we were trying to accomplish, though?
It is to some degree. The weakness here is you still have the potential for a hitchhiker, a species getting in there with that's not supposed to be moved, and you have the ability for them to move water from one place to another. Now, and because we don't sample all private impoundments for invasive species, we don't know for sure if water from a private lake is going to be, from a private impoundment is going to be, it's not on our designated aquatic nuisance species list unless we find it by some coincidence, because we don't routinely sample all the private waters looking for invasive species. So there's a water issue of moving zebra mussel veligers, and there's a potential for someone to get confused and move a species of fish that that shouldn't be moved.
Then why are you recommending this?
It's a compromise. It's a compromise on the behalf of the anglers, the trot line anglers. We're talking about 30,000 people that collect bait from the wild out of 200,000 anglers that buy a license. So it's a sizable portion of our angling public that, and this was considered last year, and you voted to not allow the movement of any fish from one place to another.
How do you feel about it, Doug?
I have mixed emotions, but I also have to be realistic, and we don't want to unnecessarily restrict someone from their traditional way of fishing. And there may be some people that would give up on fishing in public waters if we can't do this. And the other thing that you need to remember is that we can't control the movement of fish for private water fishing impoundments. These regulations have we have no authorization to control the movement of fish from private water fishing impoundments. And I need to probably define that for you. Not all private ponds are legally designated a private water fishing impoundment. They're private ponds that are cut off from the surface waters where they don't have water, rivers or creeks flowing into and out of them. And the only way that they would ever be connected to the wild fish would be through some extraordinary flood event. So those private water fishing impoundments are something that we can't regulate anyway. So if they want to do that and move bluegill and green sunfish from those lakes, they're doing it now, and we can't stop them, basically.
I think that fact made it really pretty difficult for enforcement too. I mean, it can, how do you know where the fish came from once people begin to realize everything would have in fact come from a pond? And the biggest reason that the fish were there was because of the fear of the Asian carp. I mean, we can't control the movement of water. So all we tried to do was control the movement of water inside a boat. Nothing can keep somebody from moving water around anyway. And the chance of misidentification on these two species was just virtually nil, while the chance of identification or misidentification of the silverfishes, gizzard shad, the odds were very great. These are different shape, different color, and I think it's an area that we probably, and with good intentions, I think we probably really were unduly restrictive, and I think this is a corrective measure that the public will appreciate.
It's a double-edged sword, though. When we were trying to be good stewards of the natural resources, and that's why we put that into, why we voted to have that in effect in the first place. And now, but if we say no today, then we're being too restrictive to our anglers. But I'm going to do what the recommendation is, but I just feel like I'm not being a good steward of our natural resources.
I think the big hole in this one really is the private water fishing impoundment issue, because we're
Okay.
talking about over 100,000 bodies of water out there that probably meet the definition of a private water fishing impoundment, that we can't stop someone from moving a fish from those now.
The ANS, is it expanding in Kansas? Is it decreasing?
Well, we passed the regulations last year on mandatory draining of all of boats and live wells before you could leave waters of the state. However, we did have some new arrivals of zebra mussels this year. I'm hopeful that they were there before the new regulations went into place. Chase State Fishing Lake got added late after we'd already sent this designated list off to the Attorney General. We're going to have to do an amendment later on tonight to amend that lake into the list. Asian carp have gotten about everywhere they can get on their own, but the only way they're going to spread further in the state is for someone to physically move them from point A to point B. They've hit all the dams. They've come up the Missouri River, the tributaries off the Missouri and the Kansas River, and they're well established until they hit some sort of a barrier that it's either a low-head dam such as the one at Lawrence, or a major dam such as a State Fishing Lake Dam or a federal reservoir dam, or a watershed lake on private property. So they've gotten everywhere they can get on their own. So this regulation, our efforts on aquatic nuisance species and the spread of Asian carp right now are to restrict the human movement of those, because the fish have already gotten everywhere they can get.
I think this accomplishes that goal. Unfortunately, we don't know yet, other than perhaps from adult zebra mussels attached to boats, we still don't know exactly how they're moving in. Statistically, even though you can have a zillion villagers per liter, it still is unsure as to whether that's truly been the vector that's brought some in anyway. It's kind of a mystery. I tend to think that it probably comes from actually more mature mussels, but I don't know. I mean, nobody knows for sure. But
Yeah, there's a lot of work being done to try to identify other vectors, and one that was most recently identified was turtles. They can adhere to the shells of turtles, and of course turtles can move over barriers that the fish can't move over. So over time, we're learning more and more. I don't know that the turtle issue, we're paying attention to that one specific right now, because there's turtles in the supply lake of the Milford Hatchery water supply. There's zebra mussels just right downstream in the river below Milford. And so we're very concerned about turtles that could be bringing the adults in on their backs and on their shells and contaminating the supply lake. So we're monitoring that lake very closely to try to make sure that we detect them early, so that we have precautions in place of all the fish leaving the hatchery, with flushing of the water, treating with potassium chloride and formalin to kill any veligers and adult mussels that, unbeknownst to us, might be in the hatchery's water supply. So far, we've not detected any.
Don't we have a responsibility as a board to take care of the natural resource first?
That's part of our mission statement.
Yeah, I know it is.
Yes.
That's a rhetorical question. I mean, it seems like we're watering this down to the point where, why even have it in the first place? if we've got, what did you say, 100,000
We
bodies?
have over 100,000 waters in the private lakes, private ponds and lake that may or may not, most of them would probably reach the level of being considered legally a private water fishing impoundment.
Okay. I guess I just wonder if we're watering this down so much, why even have it in the first place?
Well, I think the biggest concern that we had, a confusion of gizzard shad with Asian carp. If you put young of the year gizzard shad in a bucket with a bunch of young of the year Asian carp, most people will not be able to tell the difference. So that still stands with the changes that we're putting in place here.
So do you feel like this brings us, maybe, did we go to one side too much with that last, and this brings us more to the middle on?
This is
We're
de-
still compromising, but we still have some restrictions in place that will help. Is
The
that-
gizzard shad issues,
That's-
we still have that taken care of. And of course, the problem, the other thing that happens is lakes become contaminated, and we don't know about it until somebody tells us about it or we detect them. And so they can go for a year or two without anybody knowing there's an invasive species, so they're not on the list. And we only update the list once a year at this meeting in October. So there's potential that if something did get contaminated, we wouldn't know about it. The regulation says if you can't take bait fish out of, you won't be able to take bluegill and green sunfish out of a water that was known to be contaminated with invasive species. Robert?
All those petitions and stuff that we had earlier, and I know you probably, I mean, you're the fishing god here, to me anyway. What, does this satisfy them and their concerns? Because I know there were pages and pages of these petitions that I saw.
It pretty much does. I've had a few people contact me that said, could you add bullheads, green and black bullheads? And I said, we put in a lot of work to do this. There's been a lot of back and forth on this issue, and I feel that I would be satisfied with the green sunfish and the bluegill. And they, to the man and the woman, have told me that they were sportsmen and they wanted to help protect the resource, and they would never knowingly take a bait fish from a place that they thought had any invasive species in it, is what they're telling me. And I think that they would be acceptable to this amendment.
Well, I like that we're trying to compromise now.
I
And
think that it
there is
does
a-
accomplish the biggest issue, which was the movement of Asian carp. I think that was the most effective, or that was the most positive outcome, and I think that still remains intact without unintended consequences.
We're not aware of any Asian carp in any private impoundments at this point. We had one pond in Kiowa County that, when it went dry a few years back, we found a silver carp in that. But I think most of the Asian carp threat are wild fish in the Kansas and Missouri River tributaries in the main stem. That's where most of them are.
Michael?
Do you have any idea where most people are coming up with the green sunfish for this? Which, I mean, you put bluegill on there, but as Robert will tell you, they may call them by 5 different names, but 99% of the fishermen want green sunfish.
Yeah.
Under where are most of those being caught at that are being used for bait, do you know?
Well, we see there's a wide variety. I mean, like at our office, people would go down to the Pratt County Lake traditionally and would catch them rod and reel, put them in a bucket and use them somewhere else. Streams for sure, private impoundments, private ponds,
Are
whether
many of them
they're.
going to like the reservoirs and stuff for them? I mean, there's no way to prove it one way or the other.
There may be some. They're a little more difficult, I think, to come by in the reservoirs than they are in some of the smaller lakes. If you can find a spot where they might be spawning, though, sometimes in a reservoir, you might be more successful part of the year. I think most of them come from smaller impoundments.
As the law sits right now, if you have a flowing stream through your property, that's not considered a private impound.
No, those are waters of the state. Those fish are,
I just
Public
wanted to
domain.
confirm that, thank you.
yeah.
Any more discussion? Any more thoughts? Can I have a motion that we approve 115-7-3?
I so move, Mr. Chairman.
Can I have-
Second.
Okay. Sheila?
Commissioner Bolton?
Yes.
Commissioner Budd?
Yes.
Commissioner Dill?
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl?
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber,
Yes.
pass 7-0.
Special provisions.
Okay. Chris, if I get this out of order, you keep me straight here, okay? First of all, we've got in 115.710, we want to allow the transport of live fish from designated waters containing aquatic nuisance species during permitted fishing tournaments for weigh-in purposes. What we have is situations on some of our large reservoirs, especially for the catfish tournaments like at Milford. They traditionally will meet at the weigh-in site in the morning. Some of them will launch at the lower end of the lake. Some of them will go to boat ramps at the upper end. They like to load the boats back on the trailers and then trailer the fish down to the weigh-in, and then they release them back into the lake at the end of the tournament. We see no risk in that as long as somebody doesn't use that as an excuse to take those fish and go somewhere else with it. So the intent here is to accommodate via the Secretary's permission on a case-by-case basis the ability for someone to transport over the road using the most direct route to the weigh-in site for tournaments on waters that have designated aquatic nuisance species waters. So that's the issue here. The other thing is that we have a requirement in this regulation that would require people to keep the receipt when they purchase bait from a commercial bait dealer. They have to have that receipt with them when they use the bait. Those are the two changes in this regulation.
And how do they have a piece of paper with them, or what?
We would end up having to give them some sort of a permit, and if they were a contestant in that event, we'd issue a permit with identification information. We've done that with bass tournaments. With the Bass Pass initially, we had cards that were handed out to the participants. We'd use a similar system.
Included in this is the fact that this amendment also includes that an angler would have to retain his receipt, his or her receipt from the purchase of bait. There are two issues here.
Right.
I thought we already had that.
The way the regulation was passed last year is the vendor had to provide a receipt to the person that purchased it, but there was no requirement for the person that purchased the bait to keep the receipt with them while they were using the bait. So we had an issue where the vendors were upset because we were requiring them to issue this receipt, but yet the people could take it from them and go throw it in the trash, and nothing was coming of it. So the decision was either require people to have the receipt or do away with the receipt completely. And I think the input that we got from you during the workshop was to go with the requirement to have the receipt with you when you're in the field using those. It gives law enforcement a tool to deal with people bringing in wild-caught bait or bait from an unpermitted commercial operation.
What's the penalty if you don't have the receipt?
That would be a Class C misdemeanor, fine of up to $500. The judge could impose 30 days in jail, revocation of privileges for a year.
Other than that, it's okay?
Is there a Lacey issue if they come across state lines there, Kevin?
Yes, there could be an issue if bait comes across the state line unlawfully. That could be a Lacey Act issue, which would be a violation of federal law, and take it over into that realm potentially. Compliance by law.
I remember talking about this, but gosh, it just seems, once again, I'm not a big fisherman, but it seems like Don goes to the bait store and buys a dozen minnows, and they hand me this paper receipt, and I'm going to go, and Chris is driving the boat, and this paper receipt gets wet and goes away, and then I'm spending 30 days in jail and paying $500. It just, I mean, I understand what we're trying to do, but, you know, I don't know what the answer is, I guess.
That's the maximum penalty.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, it's, yeah, I know. Whole group of you would.
I missed some of these workshops, so you have to bear with me as I get a couple questions answered. The whole purpose of this is to prevent or decrease the spread of the zebra mussel.
All invasive species. We have rules in place on the commercial growers where they can only bring in certified bait that's been certified free of disease. as well as invasive species. And so by having this permit in hand, an officer in the field can ask to see the receipt, and then we know that the bait that's in the bucket likely was legal and
Sure.
and
But
complied with the permit.
one of the biggest species is the zebra mussel. What's the main way that the zebra mussel's being spread now?
Well, through the move, I think probably as veligers through the movement of water. Now, if somebody wants to pick up a rock that's covered with zebra mussels, put it in a bucket, go somewhere else and release it, that's a pretty high chance that would be an intentional deal. It wouldn't necessarily be an accident for someone to do that. They would have to intentionally do that. But that would be another way that it could happen. They can move downstream on their own. They can't move upstream readily they can't move upstream. They go down with the flow. So if a lake gets contaminated, basically all the lakes below will become contaminated eventually.
What percentage of Kansas lakes are not infested with the zebra mussel now?
Well, we have public lakes. There's over 400, and I think we have like 17 lakes that have zebra mussels. I'm not sure exactly where we're at now, but a lot of those are the large federal reservoirs. So
Right.
water-wise, surface acre-wise, probably about 40% of the public water.
So there's still a lot at stake.
Absolutely.
What's the number one preventable way to deal with the zebra mussel spread? I mean, we can't prevent the rivers from flowing downhill, but what's the number one human thing we can do to prevent this?
Well, the draining of boats when they leave one body of water to go to the next, and decontamination of a boat that's coming in from out of state. Inspections upon leaving, the way a lot of states have done that. They have inspectors on the lake site to make sure that anybody coming in isn't coming from an infected water, and that anybody leaving has properly drained the water. We do have a request in with the state water plan fund to be able to hire people to do those kind of boat inspections, but we've not been able. It's been in the budget twice, but it hasn't been funded. So.
My theory here is that this bait issue is this much of the problem, and the boat trafficking is this much of the problem. So what are we doing about the boats? And the number one boats that are doing this are probably the people that are in tournament in this lake this weekend and next weekend, and they're in that one. And what are we doing from that standpoint?
Well, we have a great education program, and Jason Geckler has been our invasive species coordinator, aquatic nuisance species coordinator. He stepped up to be head of our research department. He's not here tonight, and our aquatic nuisance species coordinator position is currently empty. We're in the process of trying to find someone to take that on. But we've got a good education program. We know from surveys that Jason has conducted that before we implemented the education program, very few people were aware of the risk of moving their boat without cleaning it. We have a very high awareness now of what the right thing to do is. When somebody registers a boat in Kansas in their boat package, there's all kinds of information there on clean, drain, and dry, what to do. You can leave your boat to dry for 5 or 6 days. In the heat of the summer, you'll be just fine.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's cooler weather, you might need to wait longer than that. Or you can use hot water, or you
Right.
can use bleach. So we've educated anglers, and we have the new mandatory requirement for people leaving. When they leave the water, they've got to pull the plug to drain water out of their boat and their live wells. And that's a new regulation just this year. And I'm optimistic that regulation is going to be a game changer for us, because I have a feeling that the reason that we've had zebra mussels being spread is probably most likely due to boats moving from point A to point B.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So my point is, I feel like we're throwing this much. We're going to find a 16-year-old boy who took his little brother fishing for not having a receipt, which probably isn't going to matter anything to the spread of this. But in the meanwhile, the real culprit is the boats.
Well, it's not the receipt issue on commercial bait. It's more than just zebra mussels. I'll give you an example. There are 3 reportable diseases in the United States. There's the spring viremia of carp. There is the VHS virus. It's a hemorrhagic disease. And there is, there's one other one, I can't remember what it is. But anyway, there's 3 reportable diseases. If a wholesaler comes into Kansas with a load of fish that's contaminated with one of those reportable diseases, within a week, every water body in the state will be contaminated, because they sell that much bait. In a week's time, they'll have it distributed across the entire state. So it's important that we regulate the commercial bait industry to ensure that they're not bringing in disease, they're not bringing in additional invasive species that we've never seen before, and that they're not bringing in Asian carp mixed in with the bait fish that they bring in, and they're not bringing in zebra mussels. So it's not just a zebra mussel issue when we're dealing with bait, commercial bait.
I think that we need to have this, first of all, we're asking the commercial bait, we're asking the retail bait dealer to provide it, and we've asked them to make a sacrifice. Most are complying without complaint, some are whining. And I think it enables us to keep them honest, and I think you're going to get a fair amount of voluntary compliance, and I think that I'm not sure law enforcement is going to be, or the county attorneys are going to be imposing the maximum fine. I agree with Roger, but I think this is kind of part of what we're trying to do. I think zebra mussels is going to be really hard to stop. I've been told, don't say that. Don't say that it's not going, it's too late. But it's plenty early in the game for certain other types of ANS issues, particularly some of these diseases that can decimate some water for quite a while till the new ones develop the immunity. So I think this is more of a side issue of the commercial bait rules, and I think it probably has some merit. Any more discussion?
Where I'm still confused, Doug, is your scenario of a wholesaler comes in and he sells to the bait shops, and the bait shops sell to the consumer, and the consumer uses that bait in the lakes and it's infected this much. What's that have to do with the receipt?
The receipt ensures that the bait that they're using has been through the certification process.
The contaminated bait that they're using from the wholesaler.
Well, we've been working with all the vendors. We visited every vendor, and we checked to make sure that their records show that they have certified disease-free bait that meets the criteria here. So we feel confident if somebody's coming in with a receipt in their hand from a commercial vendor, that we've taken steps, all we can do to ensure that that bait is safe to use. It's certified. It's certified to be used in Kansas. Now, Arkansas is the biggest bait state of all. They raise more bait than any other state, and most of the bait that comes to Kansas comes in from Arkansas. Arkansas will not allow any bait to be exported without going through their certification process. So we feel really comfortable that bait that's purchased from a vendor in Arkansas is probably the safest bait that we can bring into Kansas.
Chris, do you like this? I mean, from an enforcement or from a legal standpoint, not an enforcement. I know the enforcement side of it is got to have a piece of paper, so.
We spent a lot of time discussing this issue internally and with constituents about the necessity of receipt. And what it boiled down to was Kevin's folks feeling comfortable that when they checked somebody with silver fish, that they came from a certified source. And, I think the receipt issue boils down to the Asian carp issue. I mean, that's really what it's there for.
Yeah, and I understand that. I'm just, it's just hard for me to get my arms around this whole one more accountability from government type thing. That's my only thing. If it was a very defined line of, purple and red, I would understand that. But this one's pretty gray. But I'm not saying it's bad. It's just, I just say it's hard to understand if I'm sitting out there, it'd be real hard to understand.
You have a question, Mike?
Yeah, and you probably answered it and went by me. How does this affect our people that come in from out of state? You fish Love Well, Glen Elder, you see a lot of out-of-state vehicles coming in. Can they legally bring bait in from that other state? And if they do, is that in violation? And if it's in violation, is that a Lacey Act when they bring bait illegally into fish of Kansas water and across the border?
We have a requirement that any bait that comes into the state has to have gone through this certification process, whether it's from a private individual or coming in from a wholesaler or a retailer. So that's the change that we're making tonight. It's a change that we've made for the next year.
That doesn't really answer my question.
people they can't go in Missouri and seine some fish up out of a pond and bring them into Kansas and use them for bait, unless
Can
they
they-
go
can
through
they
the
go to-
certification process.
Can they go to a bait shop?
Bait store in Missouri.
They still can't bring them in here.
They just can't bring live bait in.
They can't, no. If they want to, if they have a certification, and we would be happy to inspect, on ones on the border, we don't have a problem with going over there and seeing if they're selling certified bait that meets our criteria.
Have we done that with our borders?
We've talked with some of the vendors in the Kansas City area that sell across the state lines, and we've decided internally that if somebody wants us to, and they want to sell bait, somebody in Missouri wants to sell bait in Kansas, we would go inspect and verify that that's a legitimate source and provide them with the proper receipts to give to the angler. I don't know that anybody,
And Kevin's people in the field will have a list of who those are to look on the receipt.
right, we have a list of commercial bait dealers.
The thing you have to realize is that the requirement just says from a commercial bait, it doesn't say it's restricted to Kansas. So if somebody bought the bait in Missouri, we have something to go back and check with Missouri again to see if they are a certified source as well. I mean, that's a verification.
You can do that right at Streamside or Lakeside.
If they have the receipt in their possession.
Would it be a Lacey Act violation if they don't have the receipt?
You could probably make an argument towards that way, yes. Whether the U.S. Attorney's Office would
I don't think
pursue it
anybody
or
would
not,
push it,
that's
I was
another
just-
question, but potentially, yes.
Okay.
Have we had any violations of this since last year?
Well, we don't have a law in place, so we can't have a violation.
I mean, okay.
Here's another point, just for clarification. This also includes some aquatic nuisance vegetation. Is that kind of how you put it?
Right.
Like some of the water milfoils and stuff like that?
Right, right.
Those are also some things that are being moved, that are affecting other lakes where they didn't have it in there, and now they do.
That's part of the certification process, inspections.
Any more discussion?
Kevin, I wasn't tracking with you. We've had this in place for a year, right?
Not the requirement for the receipt.
No, not the receipt.
We've had certified bait requirement for a year.
Have we had any violations of the original?
We had a wholesaler that when we inspected, had a lot of fish with no certification. He was pretty embarrassed. Turns out he just didn't have the paperwork. He was able to secure the certification from the person he purchased, from the company he purchased it from. So it was from a certified source, but he didn't have the paperwork. I don't know that we processed any, we didn't prosecute him for that.
Might not have filed charges against the incident Doug is talking about. We were aware of that, but that was things to be handled. I mean, we try to work with people to the best of our abilities. I mean, it's,
Yeah. We haven't written any tickets or
I'm
prosecuted.
not aware of any.
No
Okay.
tickets.
Okay.
I think the cases where these issues came up, I think law enforcement was pretty good to try to educate rather than just run out and write a bunch of tickets. I know that up here at Toronto, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of feedback between the CO at the time, trying to educate and get people to realize what they may want to do is wrong and how to more appropriately do it. So I don't think we really went out with the hope to generate some violations. I think we just tried to educate as much as possible. And I think this is part of what it takes to keep from moving the little silver fish. And for somebody to go out and throw a net in the Kansas River and say, I bought these at Minnesota Bait, and the wind, my receipt disappeared. And it would make it easier for you to have the receipt to see whether those silver little fish were in fact purchased there. And if it turns out it's a real big problem, and we don't want to create something that's going to have a lot of inadvertent contraventions, but I think we ought to go ahead and try it. But that's just my one vote. I think we might as well move on, though, and I will, is there more discussion?
No.
A lot of good points. I don't like undue Big Brother myself.
I
I'd like-
got one more question, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
So right now, it's okay to go to the Kansas River, grab a bucket of water, catch some sunfish, and take those and go run your trot line?
No.
No, they can only use them where, in the water where they took them.
Okay, what about, you could go to a non-endangered lake or non-endangered river, catch your bucket of water, and transport your bluegills and sunfish.
Yes.
So that bucket of water might have some of these aquatic such and such is in
It
there,
might.
and this is and that's is too.
That just, it gets back to the situation is we don't always know about them. As soon as we know about them, we'll put them on the list. But there's a risk, there is a risk of what we don't know.
There's a further issue that's associated with that, Roger, and it's the authority of our agency to regulate transfer of water. And we had big discussions about it last year, but somebody can walk down to a reservoir that's got zebra mussels and pick up a bucket of water, and we can't do anything about it.
Which is full of the little
Villagers.
just as the
Potential.
liver months.
It's just picking up a bucket of water, you know? But what we did do last year on the transport of water was take the measures to drain live wells and pull drain plugs.
That's a step.
Things that we have authority for. But, you know, if somebody wants to, if they could lawfully get water to water their cattle and load up and haul it away, that's way beyond our authority.
Okay.
So I think, you know, what we've done is what we have authority to do.
Can I have a motion that we approve this?
I so move, Mr. Chairman.
May I have a second?
I second it.
Is there more discussion?
Yes, there's an amendment for the reference document that's updating Chase State Fishing Lake to the reference document.
All right, does that amendment need to be?
Yes.
Okay. Can I have a motion that we approve the amendment?
I so move,
Motion and a
Mr. Chairman.
second, first to bring it before the
They did.
commission. Is already done?
Yeah.
All right, now a motion and a second for the,
Okay, I have a motion for the amendment.
I so move.
Do I have a second?
Is this the amendment about the special permit to,
No. This is about adding Chase Fishing
Chase
Lake
Fishing Lake
as a
State.
new and
We
clean ass
found
water.
zebra mussels in Chase after this document went to the Attorney General, so we had to go back and add that to the list.
I second it.
Okay, now we vote for the amendment.
Commissioner Bolton?
Yes.
Commissioner Budd?
We're voting on Chase?
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Dill?
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl?
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall?
yes?
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber?
Yes. There's a reference document that we have to add another, where it's,
Where's the amendment?
It's 2 pages ahead. Well, it's at the very end of the one we just did, and then the list of aquatic nuisance species is just ahead of 11517.
updates the date, it's right behind the regulation.
It's right behind the regulation.
all right, now we vote for the regulation
As amended.
as amended, and the amendment was to add Chase to the list that was a couple pages ahead of this. And does everyone know what we're voting on?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, is it 115-7-10?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, I'm sorry. Are you ready? for
Yes. Do I have a motion?
I would so move.
I second, Mr. Chairman.
Any more discussion? Sheila?
Commissioner Bolton?
Yes.
Commissioner Budd?
Yes.
Commissioner Dill?
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl?
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall?
No.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber?
Yes.
Pass 6-1.
Okay. Linda, motor vehicle permit fees.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. I came back again. This is to amend the Regulation 115-2-2. This is for the 2013 Park Pass regulation that the Kansas legislature passed in 2012 pertaining to the discounted park permit that you can purchase at renewal of your tag at your tag office or online or by mail through the registration of your vehicle. This will bring the discounted pass down to $15.50. It will increase the daily vehicle rate to $5 at the gate. It will increase the other annual vehicle that if you do choose not to purchase this pass through the registration process at our park offices to $25. The senior permits will stay at a discounted rate as it is today. Are there any questions?
Linda, I had a question. You said the daily motor vehicle permit will be $5, right?
Today, exactly right. So when you come in the gate, it'll be $5. It will take away the seasonal pass, which is lower October through March, and it will have a year-round pass of $5.
Am I looking at the right thing? This says $350.
With the associated issuance fees, this is what the.
Oh, sorry.
The base fee is, and then when you add.
Issuance fees.
Fee, it's $5.
Right. Issuance fees cost, for the vendor that actually sell them, they receive.
So it's really $350 plus the issuance
Right, that's
fee.
correct. Sorry.
Okay, all right.
$350 net to the department.
That's exactly right.
We're all about net.
I'm all about gross.
Wouldn't that
Pardon?
need to be in here?
It's a statute.
It's a statute. You,
Sets the fee.
So
Different
shut up,
statute.
Randy. Don't even worry about it.
So move.
I second, Mr. Chairman.
All right, now, is there any discussion? Any comments from the public? All right, Sheila.
Commissioner Bolton?
Yes.
Commissioner Budd?
Yes.
Commissioner Dill?
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl?
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber?
Yes.
Pass 7-0.
Now, while you're here, we're going to talk about your conduct.
KAR 115-8-19, my conduct as well. This is to, again, amend the regulation to the new to what the legislative passed in the 2012 legislation to modernize our alcohol laws, and this would actually remove the restriction of cereal malt beverages only. And this, again, is to allow us to compete with our neighboring states, which allow alcohol and the core properties.
We can drink beer.
You can drink more than beer. Adult beverages will be allowed. Still have the ability to post for areas that we may not want alcohol, so.
Do we have many instances, issues with that through the years of people having problems?
We can have issues of alcohol in some areas if not everybody is a responsible drinker, but that's what we have law enforcement for.
There have been a lot of parties and whatnot that have taken place in state fishing lakes around. Not that I ever went to Lake Fagan to any when I was a kid, but it is, and that's the reason there's a lot of no kegs and a lot of
We have no kegs.
other issues like that, so.
This will allow us to entertain lodges and resorts.
Any more discussion?
I have a question. What is legal now, Chris, in English?
2.2% beer.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Comments from the public? Well, then can I have a motion?
Well, move to approve.
I second it.
Now, is there any discussion before we vote? Okay, call.
Commissioner Bolton?
Yes.
Commissioner Budd?
Yes.
Commissioner Dill?
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl?
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber?
Yes.
Pass 7-0.
Okay. Kevin,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. The regulation that I'm bringing before you tonight is KAR 115-4-15, which deals with restitution scoring for big game animals. This is a new regulation that is a result of Senate Bill 314. As you are aware, there were quite a number of provisions within that Senate bill, this being one. What the legislature did was establish a rule or a law by which restitution values would be payable back to the state of Kansas for big game animals that are taken in violation of the law, and established a means for us to do this. And as my understanding, this law was based on a law that came from the state of Ohio. Essentially what it does is takes the gross score by a measuring system and applies that score value into a set formula that at the end you come out with what the value of that animal would be, the trophy value of that animal would be. In looking at this is trying to figure out the best way to determine the gross score of any set of antlers or horns off of an antelope. We felt that it would be best to follow along the lines of the measuring system that the Boone and Crockett Club has adopted and used for many, many years. It's a well-established system that is pretty well understood throughout the hunting communities of how to score game animals. And so we received permission from the Boone and Crockett Club to use their system as a basis for this regulation, and the means of determining that gross score is based upon the Boone and Crockett scoring system, and was taken from that as the model to be used. As a reminder, the formula changes whether you're talking about deer, elk, antelope. Some of the factors, the constant factors in the formula can change depending upon what type of big game animal you're talking about. But the most common situation that we would be seeing would be deer, and that formula simply is you take the gross score of the animal, subtract 100 from that gross score, take that number and square it, and then multiply that times 2, and you come out with the value of what the restitution value for that animal would be, that would be payable back to the state of Kansas and deposited back into the revenues of the department for restitution purposes. That's the kind of the long and the short of this regulation. I'd certainly stand for questions.
Anybody have any questions for Kevin? Very easy to understand. Yeah, I think everybody understands. Is any questions, comments from the public? Yes, sir.
I've got just one here. Marvin Whitehead, just representing myself as an official measure. What I understand, you haven't exactly decided who's going to be measuring. I mean, whether it's going to be law enforcement people or a certified measurer. The people I've talked to, it's up in the air to them yet.
Most recently, I talked with Kenneth Fitz, who is the Wildlife Chief of Enforcement for the state of Ohio, and asked exactly how they handle with this, since they've had this law for a good number of years. His statement is that there does not have to be a certified scorer. If people follow the instructions of the measuring system, which is laid out, that score can be used. And in reality, no matter what the state would present for the score, we are probably going to be challenged by the defense as to whether those figures are correct or not. And what they have done is let the defendant designate a measurer for them. And typically, you're within a very minute amount of each other of what that score would be. Yeah. And they typically take the lower of the two values.
Okay, just one thing I'd wondered in the way it's written up in the briefing book there, establishing your baselines for each individual, tine length. Both Boone and Crockett and Pope and Young make allowance for using a small cable instead of a tape measure. And most of the measures that I know use this cable. I know it's a technicality, but, you know, somebody would raise Cain about it.
Actually, there's litigation on that issue, and the litigation came out in Ohio that it was substantial compliance with the statute, so using the cable versus the quarter-inch tape.
So I just, you know, think that's something you need to consider anyhow. That was all I had.
Could I have a motion?
So move.
Second. You pick. To my right. Commissioner Hill seconded, and Sheila, any other questions? Any more from the public? Sheila?
Commissioner Bolton?
Yes.
Commissioner Budd?
Yes.
Commissioner Dill?
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl?
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber?
Yes.
Pass 7-0.
Okay, Brad?
Good job, Coach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. This is another cleanup regulation as a result of 115.819 that you just passed. This gives us the ability to determine which areas are prohibited on public lands, and these are adopted in 115.8.1. So in the reference document, we just simply changed cereal malt beverage to no alcohol. And if you look on page 2 of the reference document, it lists those areas where alcohol would be prohibited. With that, I'd stand for any questions.
Are we looking at 115.8.1?
Yes. The reference document is adopted in 115.8.1.
So we got to go back to the previous reference document.
It's behind.
It's behind, yeah.
But we don't need to vote on the reference document. Can I have a motion that we approve 115.8-1?
I move to approve.
Second.
Now, is there more discussion?
And the only, yes, Mr. Chairman, the only change is
Is
what?
the wording from cereal malt beverage to no alcohol. Is the
Okay.
only change in the
All right.
reference document.
Okay.
On page 2, it used to say cereal malt beverage, now it says no alcohol. So these are places that we already prohibited beer.
All right.
We need a roll call. Commissioner Bolton?
Yes.
Commissioner Budd?
Yes.
Commissioner Dill?
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl?
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber?
Yes.
Pass 7-0.
Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. This is 11525-6. It's spring turkey, bag limits, permits, and game tags. You're voting on 3 different changes to that regulation this evening. The first is adoption of new hunt units, moving from 4 hunt units to 6 hunt units, which we've already done for the fall season. And just to refresh your memory, we have done that so that we can better align our hunt units with our management units, which will allow us to better use our data to make recommendations on harvest regulations. The second thing is increasing the spring bag from 1 to 2 in northwest Kansas, which will be Unit 1. That's where turkey numbers have been increasing over the last several years, and we're starting to get some complaints from landowners about lots of turkeys. And thirdly, we're recommending that that folks that apply and draw a Unit 4 tag in southwestern Kansas be allowed to use that permit in adjacent units now. It'd still be limited at 500 quota. And with that, I'll take any questions.
We workshopped this quite a bit, so.
Right.
Anybody else have anything, any comments from the public, from the commission? Can I have a motion? So moved.
Second?
Any other questions, comments? Sheila?
Commissioner Bolton?
Yes.
Commissioner Bud?
Yes.
Commissioner Dill?
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl?
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber?
Yes.
Pass 7-0.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, we discussed this at the last meeting. Basically, we were establishing fees for the senior lifetime combination permit, as well as the annual fishing, annual hunting, annual combination, as a result of Senate Bill 314 being passed. The recommendation was $9 for a senior annual fishing, $9 for a senior annual hunting, $18 for a senior annual combination, and $40 for the senior lifetime pass.
How much for the senior lifetime pass?
$40.
Mike, the $40 fee also includes like a $2.50 fee that also goes with that to
Yeah, that total
put
would
that
be,
to Coles.
yeah. Well, not in the regulation. It's $40, and then you would also pay your vendor and your Coles fee, which is $2.50, so your total will be $42.50.
And a hip stamp?
If you go migratory bird hunting.
And this is, Robin, this is what kind of came out, everyone agreed.
That is, you're right, Commissioner Budd, that is the assurance that we gave the legislature. Actually, we can charge up to 1/8 of our lifetime license, but as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife rules were at the time, that $40 would qualify us for PR and DJ for 18 years. They've since kind of taken on Iowa over that. We're not sure that we're going to get the full 18 years, but the fact of the matter is we'll be on par with the rest of the states. So if we don't get the 18 years, they're not going to get the 18 years, and so the money that is distributed from PR or DJ, we should get a larger share than what we've been getting in the past.
If that challenge goes the other way, can we modify this to $46.50 or something to comply with whatever they?
You could. I doubt that would really make much difference. I think at some point, the important thing of that legislation was the ability for the legislature to have an effect on senior licenses sunsets in 8 years. So in 8 years, that will be completely up to the commission to set licenses.
You suppose I'll still be here?
I hope you are. I probably won't be.
Any other questions?
I've got a couple, sorry. I've only been a commissioner for a couple months now, and this is probably the biggest one that my people grab me and talk to me about. Got a couple uncles that are in this age group. Dad just graduated to 75, so he's dancing in the streets. I guess my question would be, is how we're going to use this money. It's certainly a lot easier for me to have Thanksgiving dinner with my uncles and tell them we're going to use this money to develop habitat and fisheries as opposed to something. So I guess my question for the secretary is, how are we going to use this money?
Well, Commissioner, it'd be typical to how we use all the other monies that we gain. I mean, most of it is to provide opportunity. I mean, of course, we use a significant amount of money for the walk-in hunting. We use a significant amount of money to maintain the public access areas that we have. We use a significant amount of money to provide shooting ranges, which we think is an important thing. A lot of the money that's being collected right now, the increases, particularly in the PR money, are because of growing purchases of handguns and ammunition. A lot of that is not necessarily for hunting, so the department over the last few years has really expanded the hunting or the shooting ranges that we have. Have a new one that's just about completed at Hillsdale. It'll be the same types of things that we've been doing in the past. I think the important thing to tell the seniors, which we did when they called while this was going to the legislature, is in Kansas, we have a number of seniors, whether they be hunters or anglers, who are paying that excise tax. And unless Kansas is on par with the rest of the states, that excise tax is in essence going to other states rather than coming back to Kansas. Anytime a senior buys a gun or ammunition, they're paying that excise tax. And if we cannot show them as a hunter, that money's not coming back to Kansas. If an angler's buying fishing equipment, they're paying that excise tax. And if we cannot show them as an angler, it's going to another state. To be clear, and so you all understand, if a senior is a deer hunter, we're able to show them as a hunter because they naturally would buy a deer permit. We're able to show them as a hunter. If they buy a trout stamp and they're a senior, we can show them as an angler. So it doesn't encompass everybody that's a senior right now that we're going to be able to capture now and show as a hunter, but it will certainly capture quite a few. Our original estimates were somewhere around $900,000. Depending on how this comes out with Iowa, that could go down. But I think the important thing is it puts us on par with the other states. I think, Chris, we're one of 14 states that don't have a license for 65 and over in some shape, manner, or form. There are some states that go up to 70. There are a number of states that have a senior pass very similar to what we've just done.
Isn't it true that if I buy a lifetime senior pass today and the department gets $40, they don't have $40 to spend? They have $4 to spend.
And that is the thing that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife has just kind of taken Iowa to task for. And I say Iowa because they just had an audit, and they are doing something similar. Oklahoma does something similar. Texas does something similar. A variety of states do something similar. And what the opinion of U.S. Fish and Wildlife had been until it was actually the day that they voted on this in the House that we found out that they'd called Iowa into question. But what they'd said before is if you could make $1 a year, and so that's where we came up with the $40. That would give us $1 a year per license with, you invest it and with modest interest, and that would get us to 18 years. So somebody 65 that bought a lifetime license for $40, we would collect PR and DJ money for 18 years. That was the interpretation that U.S. Fish and Wildlife had been working under previous to the end of April. And I think rightfully so. I don't think that's right. But they called it into question in Iowa, and we're still waiting on the final determination of what they're going to do with that. So at a minimum, what, Todd, you hear, maybe 4 years, 3 years, up when you were up in Wyoming?
3 to 4.
3 to 4 years at a minimum. If they carry through with what they started down the road at Iowa, it might be, so somebody that's 65 that buys a lifetime license, we might get 3 or 4 years out of them.
Well, what does that amount to financially?
PR's $25 a year. DJ is it 9 or 11?
It's 25 combined, it's 60.
No, it's 25 for PR, 9 for, I'm pretty sure, isn't it? Do you know what the PR is?
I was thinking 25 total.
Yeah,
25 total?
For 4 years?
Right.
I'm always trying to
That
find a
could be
way to
right.
try to make the complicated simple, and one way I can communicate to my people is to say your $40 investment, we're going to get a minimum of $100 back plus your excise tax money, which
Well,
is
it
gonna,
is the excise, what we are getting back is the excise tax money.
So we're taking this $40 and turning it into $140 is a worst case scenario, and we're going to reinvest that back into Parks and Wildlife.
Wildlife.
Wildlife, okay.
Wildlife and fisheries.
All right, well, that's
Wildlife and
good
fisheries.
to clear up. 'Cause
There's another point also in this, Roger. If they purchase that senior pass and they happen to move to Missouri or something, they can come back to Kansas and buy deer tags, turkey tags, and things like that.
Yeah.
And they'll do that at the Kansas rate instead of them being a non-resident.
And Roger, from where we started in this deal, this was a terrible, terrible thing when it started, because it was, I mean, everybody that was over 65, it was a big panic. And we as a commission were probably caught in the middle of it too, as well as the secretary and everyone else. I think Robin probably did with what we had to work with, because we really didn't do anything. Robin has taken this, I would say, to the best possible end that it could be. I really do.
Right. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for investing monies back into what we love doing, but I think all these people just want to know, we're going to get a return on the investment. What are we doing with the money? Are we building more offices in Topeka? Are we building more habitat?
The money has to go into angling and hunting. There's restrictions on what we can spend Pittman Robinson and Dingle Johnson money for.
Good.
I can't remember. Mike might be able to. Chris has reminded me, one of the things that we've talked about is what has all changed in Kansas, and we used it the last 65 years. And, you know, we have created a sportsman's paradise in Kansas, and it's been, you know, our hunters and anglers that have done it in partnership with the department, certainly, and it's the hunting and fishing licenses that they've sold, or that the department has sold, combined with PRDJ money. And if you take a look, and I mean, there are a few things that I can tell you that you'll all recognize, but it's, you know, 65 years ago, we didn't have a single federal reservoir in Kansas. And we've got federal reservoirs now, which gives us 24 state parks, and the wildlife areas that we have around all those state parks, or the wildlife areas that we have, we've got 1 million acres of walk-in hunting that we didn't certainly have. And Mike, you were the one that fixed that paper up for me. Maybe you can.
Well, we didn't have deer, and we didn't have
deer and
turkeys,
pheasant.
we didn't have walleye.
Community lakes. How many
Yeah.
community lakes do we have now? Do you remember?
Well, there's
that?
over 200 community lakes now, and there
was 50, I think. Is that the number?
Yeah, but we were just starting to build some of the state fishing lakes back in the.
You know, we've got 4 fish hatcheries that are, you know, not only the management that we do at all the federal reservoirs and all the community lakes. We've got 4 fish hatcheries that we. There are certain species of fish that we are stocking. What we're doing in Kansas is significant. And one of the things that I pointed out to the legislature, and you can pick any metric that you want to gauge the efficiency, the conservatism of the department, whatever you want to do. I had Kevin work up numbers of how many law enforcement officers we have per hunter, per acre of ground. We are one of the most conservative agencies in the nation. And the Kansas sportsman is getting a tremendous bang for their buck out of this department. And for them to think that, you know, this money we're going to take and spend I don't want to use inappropriate, for them to think that this money is not going to go to their benefit is just totally wrong, because this has been one of the most conservative agencies throughout the years, and it will continue to be that way.
And I think that's a story that needs to be told over
Well,
and
the
over.
quail habitat, I mean, we're doing significant work with quail right now.
I just wish every sports page on every newspaper in the state would carry that story, that we're taking this money, we're reinvesting it. I know he's sitting right here, but that's one small paper. Here we go. There we go.
You know,
right.
And you know, and
but it's only in very few papers, though.
Dr. Marshall, and you
yeah.
being a waterfowl hunter, I know you appreciate that. If you take and look at Kansas and look at the opportunities, and we've had partners to do all this, you know, Ducks Unlimited, but you look at what's happened in Kansas, you know, with Shine Bottoms and Jamestown and McPherson and Meridocene. I mean, you look at all of the things we've done with waterfowl. And Kansas, there's no question, we have the most diverse opportunity of any state
It's
around.
phenomenal. I agree.
And it is phenomenal, and it's the management of the department for well, 1905 is when it started, and it's just always been that way, and it's, I'm not ashamed to put our budget, this department's budget, up against any state wildlife agency in the country, and it's going to continue to do it in the same manner that we've done before.
Good.
I think it might be good to remember, too, when we started looking at this, when Robin had us do some research, we discovered that the 65 and older group was one of our fastest-growing age groups, because the baby boomer generation, those are the people that are most likely to hunt. And so he could see down the road, we could be looking at a budget shortfall unless we looked at making some adjustments. And we have always been a user pay system. Hunters and anglers have always paid their way because we don't get state general fund money for those programs. So it just continues that tradition.
I would add, it wasn't a genius on our part. I mean, I was in the legislature when Steve Williams tried to do this before in the late 90s, and Steve came forward with a very thought-out approach to it to try to phase into it, because Steve's the first one that told me, we've got the baby boom generation getting ready to retire, and it's going to be a big problem for the agency. And he came over with it was a great piece of legislation, but it was different, and so people attacked it, and we didn't pass it. So Chris and I talked about it, and our decision was we're just going to come forward with the idea we're getting rid of it, and there'll be a compromise in there somewhere. And that was the approach we took, and quite frankly, the idea for the lifetime pass came from a 65-year-old, well, he was more than 65, he was over 65-year-old guy from Johnson County. And his idea was, why don't you do one that's $100, $150. He didn't care about the cost. What he had looked forward to was the ability to not have to go in every year and buy a license, just the ease of it. And so when we went to federal aid guys and asked them to work through this, that's when they came up with what U.S. Fish and Wildlife's interpretation had been, and we could actually do it for $40. And that may or may not prove to be the case. It's not our fault. It's just, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has looked at what's been happening, and it may get changed.
Okay, Michael?
I do have a question related to what Roger was asking, though. I've talked to several license vendors that have been frustrated because they're not getting any information from the department. 3 of them have called me, asked to send one of my articles so they can, tape it right there. Are you going to do anything to help them spread the word and explain it? Because like these guys said, once you explain it to them, this is an investment that you're already paying these fees, and we're not getting anything out of it. By doing this, we're getting more money back. They said people calm down right away, but they just...
I can't tell you what the communication between our licensing section and the license vendors has been about this. I mean, we've publicized it in a lot of different avenues, and I'll tell you that Mark Merle, who worked almost a dozen days during the state fair, said this was the most common question he had at the state fair was about the senior license change. He only had 2 people that were upset about it. So that would tell me that some of our education efforts did get out, and we did get the word out about this, and that it became more of a palatable situation once people understood and they saw the compromise that was made. But yeah, I think we'll, starting with in next month, we will have to start another campaign to let people know that starting January 1, things are going to change, and here's why.
Okay, can I get a motion?
I so move, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Any additional discussion? Any discussion from the public?
What is this 115-1822, Gerald, that's single pass valid for, are we both
We're
of
doing
these?
2-1 right now.
Yeah, and I guess that's the impression I got, and I figured was that was a pass that would be for both hunting and fishing.
Well, this is kind of a cleanup. 1822 is going to basically put the senior lifetime pass on par with our regular lifetime license. It talks about the duration. It talks about what you get for it.
Okay. So they're different then?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
Sheila?
Commissioner Bolton?
Yes.
Commissioner Budd?
Yes.
Commissioner Dill?
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl?
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber?
Yes.
Pass.
Okay,
7-0.
now, 1822 is what again?
It basically clears up a regulation that makes this lifetime senior pass very similar to our current lifetime hunting or fishing license. It talks about the duration. It also talks about you have to live in the state for a year, whereas a regular hunting or fishing license, you only have to be a resident for 60 days. And that's the way our current lifetime, regular hunting lifetime license is. You have to be a resident for a year prior to being eligible. And Robert, Commissioner Wilson referred to it earlier. This also clears up that if you do move out of state, that you still can come back, that license is still valid, you can still buy big game permits at a resident price.
What if, the one question I guess I've got in this whole thing is, let's say a guy that's 50 years old buys a lifetime license now. Does that then carry over when he turns 65? I mean, it's forever then. Okay, so there's no having to come back and do it again then.
Any discussion from the public? Any more questions? Can I have a motion?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second it.
Any more discussion? Sheila?
Commissioner Bolton?
Yes.
Commissioner Budd?
Yes.
Commissioner Dill?
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl?
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber?
Yes.
Passed 7-0.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes what we have on the agenda tonight. I don't think we have any other business. Do we have enough meetings scheduled? Okay, what meetings do we need to set? January 10th?
January 10th at Butler County
El Dorado.
Community College in El Dorado. March 21st, I'm trying to get the History Center like we did last year, but I haven't heard back yet, so.
In Topeka?
In
Yes.
Topeka?
We need to set April and June, just because by the time we would come back in January, she would need enough lead time for June, so.
April is Wichita, correct?
April's Wichita,